Sylvie Grollet est licenciée en psychologie clinique.
Sylvie Grollet has been a psychologist, and she's dealing with integration of foreigners, and she coordinates the fight against violence against women. She's in charge of the Wallonia social aspects, and she fights violence based on gender, so prevention, harmonization of statistical data, study coordination, training of speakers, drafting of opinions, and report drafting, representing Wallonia on all of these scores. So she's going to tell you more about gender equality policy in the Walloon region. Indeed, gender equality and not gender equity, which is the title of my presentation. So policies, gender equality policies in Belgium are to be framed in an international context. We have the United Nations conventions on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women in 1985. And then in Peking, there was the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action for the Gender Mainstreaming concept. And this has led to the adoption of gender mainstreaming degrees to fight against inequalities. And in Belgium, all levels of governance are impacted by gender equality and will have to rule on this basis. In Wallonia, the decrees which are applicable date back to 2014 and 16 regarding the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, and it has an impact on regional policies and gender mainstreaming. So this is how these decrees are called, the gender mainstreaming decrees. Outside of those, there is more legislation fighting inequalities or other forms of discriminations based on gender. We have the decree of the 6th of November 2008 on the fight against all forms of discrimination, especially those based on gender and other criteria such as pregnancy, birth, and so on. There were some changes to the legislation and some breakthroughs regarding nursing your children, so that women nursing their children would be protected, and they will also benefit from protection when they return to work after having given birth or adopted a child. There is also the criteria of the composition of the family. There is also multiple forms of discriminations. In the past, you could only choose one form of discrimination. Now you can have multiple ones, and discrimination by associations, in other words, relatives of those who are impacted by discriminations, can also be protected, and also witnesses can also benefit from such protection. There have been decrees on mixity adopted by the Walloon government. It imposes the presence of maximum 2/3 of members of the same gender in regional advisory bodies, in non-profit organizations, in the private sector, and also management bodies of establishment for the elderly, which benefit from operating permit granted by Wallonia. On the basis of the gender mainstreaming decrees, the Walloon government has adopted a gender plan. This is the second one, 2020-2024. And the idea is to integrate a gender dimension in all public policies to redress inequalities which might have appeared between men and women. So this implies or involves all members of the government and the administration. There are 44 measures in all. and 17 different themes, gender budgeting, housing, mobility, urban development, training, and so on and so forth. So we are talking here about looking at the gender composition of the various groups and see the ratio between men and women, see whether the differences can give rise to problems and whether any correction measures have to be applied. So Wallonia is also funding non-profit organizations that are fighting to achieve more equality between men and women. In the fight against violence, we have the EU framework, the Istanbul Convention, which we have mentioned. It entered into force in Belgium in 2016 following ratification. This means that the signatory states needed to establish comprehensive and coordinated policies and allocate appropriate funding and human resources for the implementation of these policies. This is binding legislation, so that means that if the state doesn't do enough, it could be held liable. So the Istanbul Convention actually acknowledges all of these gender inequalities and acknowledges that it's also a source of violence, because violence against women is a manifestation of the historically unequal power relations between men and women that have led to the domination of discrimination of women by men, thus depriving women of their full empowerment. This means that there are various forms of types of violence, including sexual harassment. Regarding the implementation in order to achieve the objectives of the Istanbul Convention, there is a national plan which is in place, and in the Francophone part of the country, we have a plan to fight violence against women. There are 4 strategic objectives, 18 operational objectives, 65 measures, and there is a Francophone contribution by Wallonia, Brussels, and Kokov to the future national action plan. And as you can see, this actually covers the 4 strategic objectives which match the Istanbul Convention objectives depending on the area of competence, so jurisdiction, so integrated policies and data collection, prevention, protection, raising awareness, protecting and support to victims, and follow-up and management of perpetrators. There are also specific measures regarding sexist and sexual violence at work. This is something which dovetails with what STIB has done. There was a campaign organized at Tech called I'm Acting, I'mActing.be, and these were posters displayed in buses, and it encourages the public to react and respond whenever they are witnessing sexist or gender-based violence or acts. There are 2 specific measures, one which has to do with violence at home between men and between spouses. And let me give you an example. There are 10,000 agents in Wallonia, and so we are trying to raise awareness amongst them. So we are a large company, so to speak, and so we have a gender plan, and in the gender plan there is measure number 18, which has to do with domestic violence between spouses and raises awareness of sexual and gender-based harassment in the workplace and in regional public administrations, and they strengthen measures taken at work. Some of these measures have not yet been implemented, but we need awareness campaigns, information geared to the staff, training of staff, and you needed to identify people, human resources, trusted persons, prevention representatives, trade union representatives, occupational medicine, social assistance, department from the ministries. And so the angle here has been developed by SWF is this one. Regarding the other commitments that have been taken by Wallonia, there is the ILO Convention 190 concerning the elimination of violence and harassment at work. It recognizes the right of all persons to a world of work free from any violence and harassment, including those which are gender-based. And Belgium has undertaken to ratify this ILO Convention 190. So you see, it has to go through all the levels of governance. And then there is also a huge amount of work which is being done, politically speaking, at Interministerial Conference on Women's Rights. This was created towards the end of 2019. Christine Moramou, Madame Benamou called for this interministerial conference. And in 2020, it was within the framework of the health crisis. We noted that there was a lot of domestic violence, and so those were the first themes that the interministerial conference had to address. And so we tried to dovetail the different levels of governance to try to remedy the situation. Then the conference also looked at concrete measures to combat sexism in the public space, gender-based cyberbullying and menstrual insecurity, adopted by ministers and governments. This was back in June 2021 of this year. Those measures mean training, raising awareness, information, support to the non-profit organizations that cater to the needs of the victims. Some of you have attended those sessions of the Interministerial Conference about the fight against sexism and what is done at the workplace. Thank you for your attention.